urgency is not the same thing as criticality. The criticality, like the weapon system that my client works on, has a 16-layer bill of material. So if you're down here building one of the lowest level components and one of your guys out sick, so, well, darn, I'm going to under execute my throughput. That is going to have a bile wave effect for 5 months.
Growing a business requires a holistic approach that extends beyond sales and marketing. This approach needs alignment among people, processes, and technologies. So if you're a business owner, operations, or finance leader looking to learn growth strategies from your peers and competitors, you're tuned into the right podcast. Welcome to the WBS Podcast, where scalable growth using business systems is our #1 priority. Now, here is your host, Sam Gupta.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the WBS Podcast. I'm Sam Gupta, your host and principal consultant at independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm Elevate IQ. How hard could job sequencing be? Isn't it all about the order of the jobs? Yes, but there could be several rules that could be used depending on your strategy. Earlier due date, longest processing time, shortest processing time, first come, first serve, and least setup hours, to name a few. So what are the best practices when it comes to job sequencing? In today's episode, we invited a panel of cross-function experts for a live interview on LinkedIn who brings significant expertise to discuss job sequencing best practices. We discussed how the competing priorities could be problematic for the shop floor and how job sequencing rules affects the outcome for on-time delivery. Finally, we covered several stories related to job sequencing. With that, let's get to the conversation. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's show. And if you're joining for the first time, this is part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. We pick one topic related to digital transformation, and we always have an expert panel here. For today, we are going to be talking about very, very, very religious topic. I'm pretty sure we are probably going to have a little fun because we have OT, we have ERP. Job sequencing is always going to be a passionate topic. And obviously, Mark, we are probably going to get a history lesson here. Always fun with Mark. And obviously, we have Tom today. So Tom is probably going to counter the history lesson far deeper, I guess, with philosophy. So we are going to have a lot of fun doing all of that. Before we do that, we are going to start with everybody. I am going to start with my intro. If you don't know me, I am your host, Sam Gupta, principal at Elevate IQ. Elevate IQ is the independent ERP and digital transformation consulting firm. On that note, today I am going to start with Mark. Mark, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thanks, Sam. My name is Mark Lilly. I'm president and CEO of LillyWorks. We help manufacturers solve the late problem. And that is essentially on-time delivery, reducing lead times, and all that wonderful stuff around managing production. So I'm very excited to be here today to talk about job seeking.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Mark. Dave, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Absolutely. Hey, everyone. My name is Dave Griffith. I run a company called Kaplan Solutions. We help manufacturing companies go through digital transformations that pay for themselves. With that, we work kind of at the edge of technology on the OT side and operations in order to find and help implement profitable solutions for your organization.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Dave. Nirav, can I ask you to introduce yourself next?
Yeah, absolutely. Nirav Shah, I'm CEO of AdService ERP. We're a premier Acumatica partner. We implement Acumatica in all various different industries in manufacturing. Manufacturing is actually one of our specialties. Make to order, make to stock. A lot of good stories to share today. And looking forward to talking with the rest of the panelists.
Amazing. Thank you so much for being here, Nirav. Tom, joining for the first time. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. I'm Tom Pierce. I'm the founder and president of Integrated Information Systems. We go by I2S for short. I've spent my career in the Department of Defense. We have written, implemented, designed, maintained, and done all kinds of enhancements to the MRP and ERP solutions for a defense contractor in Louisville, Kentucky. Most recently, our focus has been on the dual role of business intelligence tool and analytical services. So we get heavily involved in cost analysis, schedule analysis, certainly at the root of schedule analysis, is getting work moving through the factory in an efficient way. Very complex system. I'm really looking forward to the insights from the panel.
Amazing. I'm super excited as well. Thank you so much for being here, Tom. So, Mark, I'm going to start with you. Before that, audience, if you're joining for the first time, make sure you post your questions and comments. I typically don't have a lot of questions, so I'm going to rely on you guys to send me questions so that I can ask those. On that note, I am going to start with the first question with Mark. And Mark, when I look at the job sequencing, and you talk about this a lot, and I have experienced this today firsthand. Okay, I was running late, as you know, just to make it a little embarrassing for me for this show. Okay, and I was thinking, okay, I'm probably going to make it by 5:30, and within that time, Dave pings me, and now I have to respond to him. Okay, so now that is the edit minute that I did not plan. So my job sequence is all over the place, right? So, do you want to set the stage overall in terms of job sequencing, what it is, and why manufacturers should care for that, Mark?
Sure. So there's two main meanings for me around job sequencing, right? One is the prioritization, and even within the prioritization, it's about when is the right time to start a job. That is introduce it into WIP, right? You can be purchasing or kitting, putting together the materials for it, but when is the right time to introduce that into the production environment. Once it's in production, what prioritization is best to use in order to manage it in the best way through production. So the prioritization is one part of job sequencing. When I hear job sequencing, the other thing I hear is within the context of a particular work center. Oftentimes a machine, I may want to sequence jobs based upon similar characteristics in order to save setup times, right? So you can optimize your setups, right? Reduce the amount of time you're spending on setups by doing that. And then there's certainly some offsets to that, right? Because typically folks will look at from a costing perspective, they may calculate a unit cost and say, gee, based on these calculations, if I spend less time doing it, my unit cost for the parts that I'm producing through production is going to go down, saving money for the company, right? Does it really overall? Maybe, maybe not. There are certainly some side effects to it. One of which is near and dear to my heart, and that is on-time delivery. Because sometimes manufacturers going a little crazy with that concept and trying to even releasing work based upon the batches of work that they want to save setups on. And again, it can have some really good effects, but it can also make a lot of orders late that aren't in those batches that as an unintended effect and really hurt a manufacturer's on-time delivery.
Okay, so amazing insights there. And by the way, I love the bit about priority, because when you think about priority could also be all over the place, okay? Depending upon whose priority you are talking about. So in this particular case, when we talk about the customer's priority, obviously it is going to be at the customer level, customer master level, you are going to have priority there. But when it goes to OT people, they don't necessarily understand how customers work, right? So for them, everything is going to be about shop floor. So the priorities are going to be all over the place. So overall, in terms of the sequence, Mark, let's say if we talk about how we are going to be utilizing these priorities. So are we going to be consuming the priority that are set at the customer level, and then we are going to make the best decision while prioritizing the jobs? Or how does that work overall handshake in terms of priority that we have at the customer level, and then what we are sending it to on the shop floor?
It's a great question, and there's a number of different ways, certainly valid ways in which to prioritize work in production, right? There are priorities that will maximize your capability to deliver your orders on time as much as your overall capacity will allow. There's prioritization methods that will maximize the amount of revenue or throughput that's going to get through production, regardless of when the customers want it, right? Or when due dates are, that sort of thing. There's priorities that will maximize replenishment levels. So now we're getting into, are we make to order generally? Are we more make to stock? Are we both? And that's a real struggle with prioritization as well. As manufacturers, you may be at a particular work center, and you may have 2 or 3 make to order jobs with a specific customer want date on them, right? That seems pretty clear what the priorities might be. But then you have another 3 jobs that are for make to stock material, that may have a certain level of risk of stocking out if we don't do those jobs. So how do you reconcile that? How do you prioritize that is a real challenge.
Could not agree more. Great insights, Mark. Thank you so much. And Dave, I'm coming to you. And you know this, okay? You know the rules of the game. Anytime Dave is going to be on the show, it has to be IT versus OT. But today, it is going to be OT versus everybody else.
Okay.
Because that's what job sequencing is in my mind. So, anything you could add?
No. I love that, Sam. And I am laughing, and I was laughing as Mark was talking, because kind of from the OT, from the operations perspective, I think of job sequencing as how we make the schedule actually work, right? So many times we'll say the IT folks, right? The customer service folks, they just keep shoving more and more. Yes, our customer would want this, made to order item. It's typically 56 weeks of lead time. They would like it tomorrow. Please go magically find 56 weeks that you can go run over the next 24 hours and give it to me tomorrow, because that's when I would like it tomorrow. So I find kind of the job sequencing as the how do we actually make the schedule come to life. And we can have the debate as to how we should schedule things, kind of as Mark alluded to, versus made to stock versus made to order. What happens when our replenishment levels get down in there? But kind of my major comment on job sequencing is almost every single one of the products that we're going to have, they're not homogenous, right? Like I don't put the same, I'm not a beer manufacturer. I don't make one beer down the same line. I make 100 million cans of it every single year. This line is just for this beer. I take it down, 12 hours a week to go clean it. And then it just runs this. So most of the time in the rest of the world, we've got a bunch of different job locations, and each of those job locations take different amounts of time depending upon what part that we're looking to order. So it becomes kind of the balancing act of not only do I have to sequence this particular end piece, but I also have to go try to run it through 1, 5, 10, 50 different parts, 50 different machine units. And then when I run it through all of these machine units, I have to figure out how to sequence each of those units individually, so I can ideally, at the end of the day, week, month, year, have as many actual parts that hit the on-time orders as Mark had alluded to in the beginning. So it's a very complex process that really good companies will understand how long each of these machine units should take, and we're going to give a customer a realistic, it's going to take 56 weeks in order to get this part when they call to order us, as opposed to, yes, I can give you this thing tomorrow. But it's a delicate balancing act, and you have to not only look at the part as a whole, but you have to look at all of the individual jobs and sequences that you have to do on those machines and prioritize what's important today, what can take a couple of days to wait, and when do I need to get this done in the end.
Yeah, some very interesting insights. In fact, let me see, the way you are trying to describe the scheduling, I like to compare this with the airline business, okay? And I'll give you a little story here overall of the airline business. So when you go and buy a ticket for any of the airline, you are dealing with, let's say, the cashiers. They are really interested in selling the highest, ticket item. But once you actually buy and check in, after that, when you deal with the scheduling people inside, the people who are going to be standing behind the counter, their job is to make sure you fly. Okay, their job is not to make sure that whatever the ticketing people would have told you before, they don't necessarily care for that. Okay, so that in my mind, I think that's how scheduling is supposed to work, and that's what you are trying to describe as well overall from the manufacturing perspective. That okay, you have told me that okay, these are business class guys, these are your economy guys. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that they get their seats there, but my job is to make sure everybody flies. Dave, any counter commentary there by any chance?
No, I think making sure everyone flies is a really good analogy. I think the airline business is a really good analogy, because at the end of the day, if a customer gets their part, and they get it late or maybe slightly incomplete, and you've got to ship them their luggage, the next day or a couple of days later, they're not nearly as upset than if they miss the flight and there's not another flight for 2 weeks. So I think that is a very good analogy. Shipping and job sequencing is very much like the airline business. As long as people eventually get it, nerves will calm, and they will almost certainly buy more from you later, maybe because they have to buy more from you.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. And Nirav is thinking, okay, now we are trying to decouple this whole, the booking of ticket thing, then the scheduling. How is this all going to work overall from the system perspective? So, Nirav, anything that you might be able to add from the make-to-order scenario where these two need to be incongruence in my mind? Otherwise, the scheduling is going to be off. So, anything that you might be able to share, Nirav?
Yeah, absolutely. Job sequencing obviously has a lot of different branches to it, elements to make it work properly and hum, right? It's again, like almost planning, right? MRP and MPS, it's more of an art than a science, right? You have to understand your business. You have to understand your bottlenecks. You got to understand your people, right? And, what is the best throughput? What's the best efficient way to take product coming in from one end of the door out the other end of the door, right? And it's a lot of studies of internal processes, that's not only ERP but time studies. Exactly how long does something take to process, right? A lot of times ERP systems get outdated with data because once those set up routing times, for example, on specific items, set up and run times, no one goes back and modifies those, right? So even though they get better machines are doing better work, right? But they're still running on times that they set for older machines, right? Or vice versa. Now, you're already, not optimized at that point, right? So job sequencing is a lot about production optimization to get the most throughput out there. So as you look and do time studies, right, where should we look at, reducing time, essentially? What happens, right? I had a customer actually, they're a make-to-order customer, and they were losing a lot of time because they didn't realize the next person in line in that routing step had no visibility of what production orders will be coming to them, right? So they were basically sitting there, right, with product taking a little longer than it should because they did not understand that the previous operation was almost close to complete and will be at their operation within X number of hours, right? So now you have a backlog of maybe material that's coming in, right? Now how are you going to optimize that? No one's looking at each routing and saying, traveler, and saying, well, I should take this one before this one. They're just taking the next skid that's the closest to them at that point, right? And start working on. Maybe that's not the one they need to be working on. So there was no visibility of what type of work is coming towards a work center to the next work center to them. So we created processes and functionality around that particular scenario where they had dashboards. So as previous operations becoming close to becoming completed, the next person in line in that work center knew exactly what pallets and what travelers they should be expecting, with starting dates, with ending dates, and it was color coded, right? So now you're efficiently moving that prioritization, the starting and ending dates of those travelers through your production floors, and the worker could reasonably kind of start preparing for what's coming to their station. Because the last thing you want them to do is once they get it and they get everything, then they start preparing, right? That time wasn't included already in the setup and runtime process, right? What happened to that time? That's lost time now, right? That's going to be variances on the production order. Now the production order is going to be late, and I'm telling you, as much as customers like to track on-time due dates, production orders being completed on time versus not completed, they're not tracking that well at all. And what happens is the customer in Mark's world, right? Everyone's like saying the order is late now. What do we do, right? Now, if you look at that process and try to figure out what is a bottleneck, who needs the information when to make sure that we are processing our orders more accurately, right? And scheduling and sequence these orders properly is where you're going to get the most value, right? Some of this is system related. Some of it is process. Industrial engineering, guys, it's a term out there outside of ERP. And you need people that understand this, how routings work, right? And how they need to work, and they need to marry together with items when you're in a manufacturing environment.
Mark, you have a comment? You unmuted yourself.
I do. Yeah, I'm sorry, Nirav. I can't help myself. Well, number one, congratulations on the visibility from your dashboards. Phenomenal. What you implemented there for that client you just described is an awesome execution system so that you focus the production folks on execution first before planning, right? And that it sounds funny, but and I think that's what you did, whether you realized it or not, and your client had tremendous results for it. This is the issue with the traditional scheduling model, and I'm going to take you to task a little bit on the word optimization, because the reality is there's no computer system in the world today that can create an optimized schedule. Okay, just look up job shop scheduling on Wikipedia, or even better, watch the movie called The Traveling Salesman,
Exactly,
from 2012. It's about the NP completeness, and in computer science, it's proven that if there are more than only like 3 machines, it's like a really small shop. It simply becomes impossible to calculate an optimized production plan. So are there production plans? Sure, there are heuristics that backward finite scheduling, forward finite scheduling do, but this whole idea of trying to create a plan is really in the right place, except when you take that plan, however good it is, and bring it out to the dynamic production environment that's today's manufacturer, 5 minutes later, it's not worth the paper on, right? So what you did by focusing the client first on executing the right way, I'm sure had huge benefits to them.
Yeah, absolutely, it did. And you're right, right? There's, like I said, planning and all these, right? They're more of an art than a science, right? There's not a true answer, right? It all depends on intimate relations with vendors, your employees, right, with customers. But what you could do is really try to find the right balance, right? Find a decent lead time that you could actually commit to. I think that's the challenge. Is not understanding what that lead time is, because it's constantly fluctuating. I'm thinking about our COVID, pandemic we just went through, right? I mean, lead times were out the door. There was no way to really accurately forecast that. I mean, job scheduling and forecasting, what is that at that time, right? I mean,
Exactly.
but if you understood when you got the product in, you had a reasonable shot, right, of meeting some sort of date, right, at that moment, because you understood your process well enough. So I think, coming back, Sam, it's all, job sequencing it has a tremendous effect with organizations upstream and downstream, and it has to be looked at in a holistic view, right? Nesting software is another huge thing in the industry right now. Some engineer make to order shop nesting software is where they could really improve their processes. They take a sheet of steel and they could form out 6, 7, 8 different customer orders at that time. Now, how do we plan that? How do you schedule that? How do you record the output of that very quickly and efficiently, so now the next person knows that now we're done cutting and you got the right cost and you got the right time allocated to it before it moves on to the next stage. I mean, there's a lot of moving technology moving fast.
Yeah, amazing insights there. The only comment that I would like to touch, Nirav, on your commentary is going to be your comment related to industrial engineers. And I completely agree. I mean, the whole process design, as well as the way you are going to be designing your ERP process, it's a lot of engineering, to be honest. Okay. And I'm going to actually call out my CFO brothers and sisters out there, to be honest. They all feel that they can implement an ERP, but there is a little bit of engineering involved there, in my mind, and that you have to have real deep engineering background to be able to really optimize, customize, iterate, test. A lot is required there. It's not supposed to be as easy. Thank you so much, Nirav. So, Tom, I know you are waiting to comment on whatever Mark has commented, and I can sense a little presidential debate there between you and Mark.
Actually, I'm kind of rejoicing at all of the different things I'm hearing, and I'm not quite sure where to start. Mark, I have to just congratulate you on what is for me the first use of the term want date instead of need date. I just wish so much that was actually communicated during the sales process. Okay, we understand when you want it, but what actually happens if you don't get it on that date? And in the Defense Department, of course, the whole U.S. military has a very sophisticated scheme of prioritizing in a sense that most of us don't mean. A priority 1 is a unit in the field with a system that is down. There are lives at risk. Certainly, I think in the medical community, others that are priorities like that. But so, although I certainly resonate with the singular concept of priority, I understand it to have a limited meaning in terms of in what order are you going to do things. And that to me branches to the motivations for sequencing. And personally, I think there are four in practice real motivations. One of them is just urgency. Just if we do not make this date, really bad things happen. So it absolutely, work overtime, lose sleep, double shift, whatever you have to do, get this thing done soonest. But urgency is not the same thing as criticality. The criticality, like the weapon system that my client works on, has a 16-layer bill of material. So if you're down here building one of the lowest level components and one of your guys out sick, so well darn, I'm going to under execute my throughput. That is going to have a biowave effect for 5 months. 5 months from now, the guy in the last work center is going to be waiting on that part. So, and Nora, this kind of goes to your point about the industrial engineering. Yes, absolutely, you can know how long it takes, but there's only I'm not assuming that you're committing this fallacy. I have seen it committed by very confident industrial engineers of expressing overconfidence in point estimation. That when you have a very small coefficient of variance and how long each one takes. But particularly in the overhaul world, but also in any kind of a complex supply chain, the variability of time to make time has to factor into the equation. So, what do you want to do? Add 1 standard deviation, 2 standard deviations to mitigate the risk? You want to build in white space into your routings to absorb buffer. You want to make sure your people understand that if this component isn't ready on time, then maybe it doesn't have to be installed at the next higher assembly. Maybe the shortage can be rolled. So that kind of flexibility, I've had the privilege of learning from what I would call PhD level material planners. And this kind of goes back to Mark, your statement about there is no such thing as a perfect plan. That the plan's no good once it's written. Well, not all plans are written on paper. And this is where I love the analogy of the planning, the intuitive, instinctive, skilled art of planning that a shortstop, a point guard, a quarterback, a head chef in a busy kitchen, they plan instantly. And then the people around them respond to body language as much as anything to know what to do next. But I really do think it starts, there's kind of a 3-tiered way of turning an MRP plan into an execution plan. It starts with what is really important to the people that are paying the paychecks. It starts in the owner suite. And then there's the manager in the dugout that is seeing things play out, watching the variables, and he needs to move somebody from this position to that position because he's seeing a bottleneck coming. That's sort of that tactical. And then there's the operational, the guy standing there at the machine that sees the problem coming, that just yells over the wall across the room and says, dude, I need that part now. That doesn't have to get written down, but it needs to happen. And one of the, I think, Sam, I think I got involved in a debate, and I don't remember who it was with one of the guys that we shared communication with on LinkedIn, about just the rigidity of plans. That if you punish people for deviating from the published plan, you are killing critical thinking, critical analysis, innovative solutions. And the people that really make the factory work, it's like in my other career, I've been a pastor of multiple churches. The person that runs the church is not the pastor, it's the church secretary. It's the person that knows everybody, knows who to call, knows who's mad, knows who needs, the guys closest to the problem are the guys most likely to come up with an innovative solution. And sometimes the executive planning and even the software itself is the thing that needs to be more flexible to respond to what the people that are actually touching the product know what's going on. Quick list. What's urgent, what's critical, what's important. There's also a fourth that I call fill. One of my favorite stories when I started my business, a guy from the name of Bruce Williams, he ran a custom cabinet shop, but it was extremely seasonal demand. And he just absolutely couldn't afford to lay off and hope to hire back his skilled craftsmen. So he had a neighbor that was just complaining one day. He was in the shipping business, and he was just having all kinds of trouble keeping a steady supply of pallets. So the cabinet maker said, I got an idea. How about when my guys don't have enough work to do, I just make pallets for you, and I sell them to you at cost, no margin. So now we're back to what are we optimizing? Forgive me, Mark. I don't like the word either. Minimize, maximize, optimize, elusive. What are we trying to improve most? Well, utilization is one of them. You want to make productive use. I know Eli Goldratt would fuss at me where they go, it's not the ultimate measure. But when you have the flexibility to keep your people and machines productively engaged, even if they're doing something 3 months early or something that your most important customer doesn't need, it kind of keeps the flow. Last point, my favorite prioritization system of all is what I call BOMB. I think we talked about that before, Sam. It's at BOMB, it's get the boss off my back. Whatever your boss is yelling at you the most is what you're going to do first. And that understanding the relational part of how priorities get communicated from top down, it's really the root cause of an awful lot of dysfunction in organization. It's just the way people beat each other up for lateness.
You have a comment? Sorry.
Yes, no, thank you. So I generally really like all of Tom's comments. I guess I like Tom's comment towards the kind of captains on the floor who generally know what needs to be done in those critical thinking moments. What scares me is the fact that we're going to lose all of them at some point in the not too distant future. And if we don't do a good job of writing that down or teaching that or training that or finding ways to pass that on to the next generation, we're going to run into the solution like we see NFL football teams of you've got a generational quarterback, you've got 10 or 12 great years, and then they ride off into the sunset, and then you've got 8 or 10 terrible years while you look for the next person who can possibly fill that role. And in the manufacturing industrial space, I think everyone knows we can't afford 10 bad years where we don't have those critical thinking, critical training abilities. And so the question or comment is how do we get to the point of being able to teach and train that to the next group coming up, or find how are we able to keep that internalized within the organization so we don't lose that when everyone up and retired?
Absolutely. May I respond?
Yeah, please, yeah.
One of the things that kind of grieves my soul as a graybeard myself, and my middle son works for me, and he's been working for me for 15 years, and he's learned a lot from me, but as in all father-son dynamics, he doesn't do everything the same way his dad did. And so that kind of grieves my soul a little bit. But one of the guys I've learned from, this material planner, his son has now filled in for his shoes and is the lead material planner. So there is an awful lot that can be transmitted organically, relationally. But all of your points are very well taken. And I think I would even offer an amendment to what you said. And that is that the profession of planning, I don't think gets the respect it deserves. No offense to industrial engineers and, enterprise architects and software developers of all stripes, but a career progression of being an expert planner, in my experience, they tend to be, underpaid, undervalued, treated as interchangeable parts. And your quarterback illustrated. Sorry, I'm a huge Peyton Manning fan, and it was a little bit hard for either the Colts or the Broncos to fill in behind him. Every team, it's a wonderful illustration. And I really do think the career development, the recognition of planning as a career path, where we're talking, ERP, MRP, SOP, IP, they all have planning in them. What is this? What do you major in college if what you want to be, or in high school or in trade school? What do you put on your resume if what you really want to do with your life is be a master expert planner?
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Tom, for that. Mark, did you have a comment as well? You unmuted, I guess, yourself. No?
Yes. Yeah, I just wanted to say that, Tom, number one, that you brought up Goldratt is interesting. We certainly utilize TOC principles in what we do, certainly not exclusively. We have Lean, we use a mathematical Q theory, Six Sigma, all of these principles together. But actually I think Goldratt would applaud what your client did in the cabinet maker in terms of utilizing the resources that he had and charging at least costs to cover that part of it. Now, if he charged 1 penny more, what Goldratt would say, of course, that's throughput accounting, and that penny would go right to the bottom line, right? So even just covering cost is much better than what most people do, quite frankly. Right. And that is if you're making what my dad used to call wow years, right? While you have an order for 100 this month, make 500 more, right? Then none of that is going anywhere except, in sitting in inventory.
Exactly.
And lean would call that ways too.
Yes.
Okay, amazing, guys. So we can do one more round, and that is going to be any sort of stories that you might have related to job sequencing. Obviously, we want to hear any sort of train wrecks that you may know. That's my favorite part. So any stories, Mark? Any other comments over comments? Mark, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest thing that we see is folks just struggling with the scheduling concept, right? And that's why, just from our experience, the traditional finite scheduling, folks have tried it, and it's very few, whether it was our ERP systems, whether it was Profit Key or Visual, or we see it in really just about any ERP system, regardless. And there are some ERPs with phenomenal finite scheduling functionality embedded in them, just incredible. But most companies, in spite of that, struggle with it, and they're reverting back to spreadsheets. There's a number of reasons. One of them goes right to the heart of this topic, and that is the prioritization method of due date, right? Which seems to make perfect sense. However, and you can look at this both ways. From a make to stock environment, due date is, again, really important piece of information. That's when your customer wants it. But depending upon how long there is of work that needs to be done, Nirav mentioned a lead time, right? And I implied this, and Tom's mentioning a buffer to buffer that. So the work that needs to be done, right? So most make to order manufacturers will have jobs that are due, say, 2 months from now, as an example, that's more in danger of being late. It's got a higher risk level, right, Tom, right, than a job that's due even a week from now. But if you're always prioritizing things based on looking at stuff that's due earliest, you're not going to see that. You should be working on that 2-month job now, and let that week job, the one due in a week, let that sit for a day or two while you're working, to make sure you're not going to get late when you're 2 months down the road. So but it also applies in make to stock. And what's interesting is by following a due date in make to stock, for example, if you have a list of production orders and they all have the same due date, for example, which one really, one of those is probably most important. And which one is the one that's most important? It's the one whose part is most in danger of stocking out, right? Mm-hmm. That's the one but folks don't have visibility of that. So it makes that and then you bring in make to order as well. It makes it a very complex problem that most manufacturers continue to struggle with.
Yeah, completely agree. Great insights, Mark. Thank you so much. Dave, coming over to you. Any stories that you might be able to share and comments?
Absolutely. So first, I'd like to say I think the comments of a good schedule or materials planner is cannot be understated, right? That they are worth their weight in gold. And at first, I was going to say could be the most valuable person within the organization, but then I realized we're talking to CFOs, so they're very possibly the second most valuable person within the organization, behind you, CFO, that we are currently talking. But no, I don't think that can be understated. They either will move everything along smoothly. When it goes smoothly, you won't know they're there, and the joy of not knowing you're there might make you undervalue them, which you absolutely shouldn't, because if they are gone, then you realize how catastrophic not having a good materials planner is. So as people, longtime listeners know, I do a lot of work with facilities. Earlier this year, I worked with a food and beverage facility. We walked in, and they generally had a good schedule. The schedule did change 5 or 6 times a day, which is generally very bad for any facility. But similar to Narev's conversation, they would go schedule the front half of the process, and then things would sit, and maybe they would be in spec, maybe they wouldn't be in spec, maybe we take 20 or 30 hours of downtime before we can package them. Similar to Narev's example, we did a similar kind of 2 hours of a dashboard on a screen, slap up an iPad with a schedule, and suddenly they were able to execute the schedule. What an amazing thing. A little bit further downstream, so this group did they canned things almost exclusively. And for about 6 weeks while I wasn't there, they had a missing step in the sequence of the line. And that step was we didn't quality control any of these cans. So I go and I come back and they had not done the job sequence of like literally checking the rims of the cans to make sure they didn't leak. And I come out and the warehouse is just full of 6 weeks worth of rework that had to be done because we did a poor job sequencing the quality control, which was the worst instance that this group in particular had that I witnessed, but is not the first time that it had happened. They very regularly struggled to do that properly. But no, that's kind of, I feel like Sam brings me on to listen to catastrophic stories. So that's the best catastrophic story of job sequencing that I can provide. I've got a couple more if we do come back around. So.
Do you want to cover probably one more? I think we can go for one.
Okay, so
go ahead.
Absolutely. So on the flip side, I was working with an oil refinery, and they were very continuous, right? So they would come in, they would have we'll just call it a pipeline of oil that comes in. It goes through a stack. It goes through a bunch of chemical and other processes, and they get different levels, different grades of this that they can then go and blend. And this group continued to have the issue of we never know how much of what we have at any point in time. And so because they were out of sequence, they didn't understand what they had, they would regularly overrun the stock of one particular thing. So one thing they would have, and they would have to dump maybe like once a quarter, is a whole bunch of diesel. So all of the businesses in the area, their internal sequence of we'll go buy like 2 tanker trucks full of diesel when they're selling it below cost, and they were getting $1 or $2 off a gallon because they were able to go purchase it when they were well overstocked, and they were unable to kind of plan based upon demand and everything else into the ability to go ahead and sell based upon demand. And so they just taught everyone to only wait until we have well overstocked ourselves and have to dump it for pennies for the dollar before we come purchase.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave, for that. Nirav, any stories, comments over comments?
Yeah, no, a lot of good commentary and feedback. The audience is, enjoying the conversation that we're all having here. I do have one story. There's a manufacturer that I was implementing, and they implemented lean. They did cell manufacturing, and had a bunch of cells all across the plant, but they were coming onto the first ERP. So when we were going through implementation, we're trying to help explain to them how this type of thing would work in their manufacturing environment, and they were really adamant about having individual production orders at each routing step. So think of a cell of four steps in the router, and each particular routing step would have a production order. Like, well, we don't think it's going to work. They're a high volume plant. What they didn't realize is a lot of the items should have been phantoms when they would create it. Because of the cell manufacturer, they were actually running in a fashion where things were being consumed from one step to another step with very little movement of somebody. Right? Maybe it was a case going from one place to another place, but they're really never stocking that. That just stayed there in that cell, got consumed, and at the end of the line, the last cell, the last work center, it was basically the finished good. The stuff in the middle never got stocked, there was no physical inventory to it. Anytime something hit the first routing step, it always went down to the end as a finished good in that specific cell. I mean, talk about a disaster manufacturing sequencing project right there. I mean, they could not plan anything out, because now you're planning down to each routing step instead of planning that cell. And everything should have just been rolled up. The bill of materials should have been rolled up to the top level item that they were making, right? And all those routing steps should essentially been part of the top level item, not the subcomponents underneath it, essentially, right? So this company was so adamant about being more or less a, discrete manufacturer and having a production order for each individual sub assembly, instead of realizing, wait, that's not the way we should be planning. And we should be planning more at the top level, consolidating our raw material, because the way we're going to plan is actually at the side. When something goes in, it's going to come out the other end. Everything in work in process is never going to go out and be stocked at the end of the day. And that was an interesting scenario there. And we had to go back and readjust all their items to make those phantom items instead of actually, items that they would stock, readjust their bill of materials, readjust routings. And then instead of getting, 250 production orders across the floor, they were getting maybe, 50 or 60, a lot more manageable, right? Now they're able to sequence a little better, have priorities, understand, what's coming next, and have a happy client at the end of the day. But yeah, that's, where a customer was really adamant about which way they thought that they should be handling their business, but not really understand the ERP consequence and, how they should do that. And, that's where, we come in as experts and, understand systems, understand how that should be practically applied to what users are doing on the floor. And I thought that was a great example of how, you could take an environment, right, turn it upside down if you really don't understand job sequencing and planning properly, because you need to understand the ERP system.
Yeah, so that's a very interesting story, and I may have a related story there. And I don't know if that was the production order for each of the sub-assembly or for each of the routing operation. So I have sub-assemblies, right? In my case, what I have seen is they had the production order for each of these steps, because the older ERP systems could not really support the whole depth of the BOM, because it was too much processing power that they needed. So they had to really break it down to process individually. That's how they were doing. Now that becomes your business process. Okay. So when you are going to buy an ERP, my business is different. This is how I work. Okay. I release each single production order for a routing, and the customer has debated with me. I'm like, sir, you are using this from 1970. Today, this is 2020. Okay. Things are a bit different. Okay. You need to change. No, my business is different. So it could be a fun conversation, Rob. Love it. Do you have any follow-up comments there?
Yeah, still to this day, I'll get opportunities, and it would be a repetitive manufacturer, process manufacturer that wants to split out the bill of materials into different, different production orders. And I'm thinking in my head, why? You're going to create a backlog, because think about all the transactions you have to do, right? Yeah, that's going back to, Tom, you're saying the tribal knowledge, someone could manage that, right? And then catch the system up, quote unquote, and still process it through to keep the line flowing. But what happens at the end of the day when that person retires, right? Now they're sticking to how the system was set up. And now you have basically an accident waiting to happen, right? Line shutting down, right? You don't have a material that could come into the line, right? It's an important, piece that, what is happening on the floor, who is doing it, and the ERP system, they all have to be aligned together. It has to be a continuous circle in order for all this to work.
Okay, amazing insights there. Thank you so much, Ralph, for that. So, Tom, any stories, comments over comments?
Speaking of the 1970s, not everything that was done in the 70s was dumb, but some of it was rather, shall we say, artful. Nirav, when you talked about giving visibility of work headed your way, I worked for about a decade under an operations manager that had his own very creative way of doing that without computers. He would actually create artificial backlog. He would overschedule everything so that all of the workers could visually, he kind of like invented visual factory before the term was known, that he wanted them to see the pile of work waiting on them. So he basically lied to everybody about the urgency or the need date of everything. But that kind of led to another series of problems. And Dave, I kind of loved it when you said, oh my God, we don't want backlog. Well, okay, sometimes you have it. And there was this one particular guy that was running, in essence, a machine shop. It was a feeder cell to 5 buildings throughout the plant. And people learned that he was running his priorities on need date. So just like the guy who's always late, so you lie to him about when the party starts, everybody started lying about when they need it to try to jump line, because the need date was also the relative urgency. Not it was doing the dual purpose. And so he couldn't stop it no matter how hard he tried. So he finally just gave up and said, forget it. We're going FIFO. You want your job out first, you get it to me first. If you don't get it to me, it's like, your party will not be seated at the restaurant until all of your people are there. I'm sorry. I'm just done with the games. And it worked. It actually worked. It incentivized people to get their work done and to him so that they could get it back. You got to know the culture of your own work centers and fit the scheme, align the priorities accordingly. So he was a genius.
Yeah, could not agree more. In fact, I have another story there, on your comment related to these creative solutions from 1970s. And we had a guy in our office and we are looking at his screen and we had a little sequence diagrams, a flow diagram that 1, 2, 3, 4, and a bunch of arrows all over the place. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? I mean, why do you sort of write on your screen? And this particular person, what he did is because the computers were very slow, right? And the processing would take roughly half an hour to an hour. And then the person has to simply stare at the monitor. So what he had done, he had figured out that, since it is going to take roughly half an hour for this processing, but each step is going to take roughly 5 to 10 minutes. So what I'm going to do is I am going to click at each of the places and have marking for those places on my screen, and so that I can go for a coffee or maybe for a cigarette. So that's what he used to do. He used to click on everything based on the markings that he had on the computer. You could not find anything smarter than that.
Wow.
That's talent.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Any follow-up comments there, Tom? Anything else?
Sometimes you just have to love the ingenuity of the people that are actually problem solving on the fly.
Yep. Very interesting, guys. So we have roughly 6 minutes right now, and I don't think we can do another round. So we can probably take very long closing advice today, roughly a minute and a half. Each person. So Mark, I'll start with you. Any sort of closing advice that you might have?
Sure. Yeah. It's just a couple of comments. It's funny because within the last year, I had a client, the similar thing, and it wasn't the sub-assemblies. It was, they had sub-assemblies in addition to that, but it was literally like a 4 or 5, departmental process. And this was an automotive. I mean, they were going from raw coil steel, to an automotive part with just 4 or 5 operation steps. Right. But the core, what we found out was the core issue was that the production folks fundamentally were not going to and did not want to report quantity. So the reason they had a work order for every operation was that the inventory people, so it was the inventory control people who would be in WIP, and they would receive the material from one operation, right? And then they'd issue it out to the next operation. So, and that's the way they got their quantities reported through each operation step. And so once we addressed that core issue, then we were even allowed, right, to put it together in 4 operative work. So it was amazing.
So yeah, go ahead, Mark. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's okay. So I wanted to share that. I wanted to make a comment about, and I think it was Tom who mentioned utilization and kind of a la, you may know it, kind of a la Gold Rat, right? Gold Rat, TOC doesn't like local optima, right? Which you often see, and when you walk through a manufacturing plant, is in different work centers or departments, you'll see the paper graph, what's my utilization, what's my efficiency in this department, right? So and there's a lot of issues with, you can flood, you can bring your utilization way up if you ask for more material. Hey, as soon as you get material, get it over to me, so my utilization, right? So that all seems to make sense when you're looking at cost, from a unit costing standpoint, and how am I utilizing my resources and all that. Of course, TOC was saying, you want to get to as much utilization as possible in your bottleneck resources, but the others, you're just flooding WIP if you make those more. But the point I wanted to, the one thing that even Goldrat didn't, he may have said it somewhere in one of his books, I haven't found it, but it was in a different book called Factory Physics where I learned this, and that is that utilization is directly correlated, exponentially correlated with queue time, right? So the higher your utilization goes, the longer your queue times are within each department, meaning the longer and longer your lead time is. And production folks know this intuitively, right? Gee, the busier we get, the longer our lead times are, right? And that's a side effect of trying to artificially boost up utilization is your lead times are.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Mark. So now we have to do the real-time job sequencing here. We have to rush it quickly, I guess. We have just 2 minutes now. So closing advice, Dave.
Absolutely. As we were saying, material planners, absolutely important, critical folks that you're looking to have. Good material planners will make your lives easier. Bad material planners will make you go look for another job.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Dave. Nirav, closing advice, please.
Yeah, no, job sequence is the lifeblood of any business. Make sure products are out to customers on time. What I would challenge customers to do, prospects to do out there, is look at what your current lead time is, routing lead times for a specific part, and look at, have you been meeting that same lead time historically for that same part through production? You'll find out a lot of answers on how to.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much, Nirav, for that. Closing advice, Tom, please.
Build trust. Build trust through honesty between workers and supervisors, between the humans and the machines, between the upper management and lower management. The more people actually trust when you tell them, I need this, the more likely they are to actually respond in good faith.
Love it. Could not agree more. Thank you so much, guys. That's it for today. If you joined for the first time, this was part of our digital transformation series, for which we meet every Thursday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. So make sure you guys are going to be here next week. We are going to come back with another topic, and next week is going to be our last show for the year. So make sure you guys are not going to miss that. On that note, thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thanks all. Thanks, Sam.
I cannot thank our guests enough for coming on the show, for sharing their knowledge and journey. I always pick up learnings from our guests, and hopefully you learned something new today. If you want to learn more about Mark Lilly, head over to lillyworks.com. It's LILLYWORKS.com. If you want to learn more about Tom Pierce, head over to i2s.us. It's i2s.us. If you want to learn more about Dave Griffith, head over to dave-griffith.com. It's DAVE-GRIFFITH.com. If you want to learn more about Nirav Shah, head over to exodus.erp.com. It's ADCIRRUSERP.com. Links and more information will also be available in the show notes. If anything in this podcast resonated with you and your business, you might want to check other related episodes, including the interview with Nirav Shah, who shares his insights into the process challenges of make-to-order manufacturers. Also, the interview with Megan Gamble, who shares her insights into building the systems for the packaging industry. Also, don't forget to subscribe and spread the word among folks with similar backgrounds. If you have any questions or comments about the show, please review and rate us on your favorite podcasting platform or DM me on any social channels. I'll try my best to respond personally and make sure you get help. Thank you, and I hope to catch you on the next episode of the WBS Podcast.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the WBS Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform so you never miss an episode. For more information on growth strategies for SMBs using ERP and digital transformation, check out our community at WBS.rocks. We'll see you next time.